Welcome back to Women in Westminster, where we explore the human stories behind the headlines. I'm your host, Eleni Barrett, and today I'm speaking with Eve Livingston, who is a freelance journalist focusing on politics and social inequalities. Eve's work has appeared in The Guardian, The Observer, and The Independent, just to name a few. She has also won and been shortlisted for a number of awards, such as the Orwell Prize and the Right to End Violence Against Women Award. The list goes on, and I'd run out of time if I tried to speak about all of your achievements, but it's great to have you on the podcast, Eve. Firstly, what initially drew you to journalism and how did you get your start in the field?
I think I've always been quite interested in journalism, mainly as a way to kind of shed a light on things that are unfair and potentially have a role in challenging and changing them. So that's the type of journalism that I'm interested in doing. I kind of call myself an inequalities journalist, which is something I've sort of just come up with myself which is a privilege as a freelancer to be able to define your own sort of beat. But that allows me to bring in all different types of stories. So sometimes I might be looking at workplaces or workers' rights. Sometimes it might be around gender. Sometimes it might be immigration. But the kind of thing that binds all my work and stories together is that focus on inequalities. So I think that's what really drew me to it, was how can I use the sort of skills and interests I have, which were around writing and telling stories, to challenge things and have a kind of positive impact, and journalism seemed like a way to do that, I think.
What piece of journalism that you've worked on are you most proud of and why?
So I think probably the things that I'm proudest of are where I've done kind of investigative or bigger, longer term projects, because they're especially hard to do as a freelancer when you're not kind of in a workplace with an editor to speak to all the time, and just logistically, you don't have, when you're a freelancer, you're paid for your stories, you're not paid necessarily for your time. So it's hard to do kind of long-term, in-depth investigations. So just a couple that I have done. I did a front page for The Observer, which was a really proud moment for me a couple of years ago, and that was an investigation into delivery drivers and the fact that they were. Most people know that delivery drivers use kind of phones, like GPS systems, to know where they're meant to go, where they're meant to deliver the food most of the time that is. And I had found from speaking to delivery drivers and their unions that the GPS maps were sending them off through quite dangerous routes, or sometimes wrong routes, so like road closures, that sort of thing. And then when the driver was making a decision not to follow that dangerous route or not to go through a closed road, the GPS system was automatically kind of penalising them and resulting in them being dismissed from their jobs, essentially, because of a fault in the technology and not a mistake that they had made. So I did an investigation into that for The Observer. I spoke to a lot of different delivery drivers and kind of gathered the evidence from them, screenshots of the GPS and that sort of thing. And that made it onto the front page of, obviously, a national Sunday newspaper. So that's probably one of the biggest moments of my career.
We've just brushed on you engaging in investigative journalism. So what are the unique challenges and rewards of that type of work?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of both. There's a lot of challenges because obviously the very nature of investigative journalism is that you're trying to uncover things that people don't want you to uncover. So quite often you might be dealing with quite big, kind of powerful, scary people or companies who spend a lot of time and money on trying to keep things secret. So that's a really big challenge, is just how do you even begin, even if you have a kind of idea or a hypothesis, which is where most investigative journalism begins. Most of us can kind of have a sense that there might be something weird going on somewhere, or that there's probably something unfair happening in some company. But how you begin to kind of evidence that when the odds are so against you is really, really difficult. Getting people to trust and speak to you, that's difficult across all journalism for good reason. People are kind of wary of journalists. Not all journalistic output is of the same quality. So sometimes people might read things and think, all journalists are terrible and they're out to get me and they don't care about my interests. And that makes it hard for journalists like me, who I would like to think of as being someone who does care about people's interests and treating them fairly and well. So it can be hard to get people to speak to you. But the rewards are great because you're uncovering something that wasn't known before. So that's like quite a grand outcome, really.
It's
You're adding to
exciting.
the kind of you're adding to the public's knowledge of society and how it operates and runs. And there can be really tangible impacts from investigative journalism. Sometimes policies can change, or MPs can ask a question in Parliament off the back of an investigation, or unions can kind of campaign on an issue that's been uncovered by a journalist. So there's all you can see. Sometimes you can really track through the kind of specific impacts, and that makes all the challenges worthwhile, I think.
So what kind of got you into journalism in the first place? What was it particularly about that field that appealed to you? The feeling you're sort of passing on knowledge, or like what was it?
Yeah, I think it's that. I mean, I said it kind of earlier on in the conversation, but I think the ability to sort of shed light on things and make a bit of change. I think all journalists, you kind of need to be inherently curious about the world. You need to be
Yeah.
interested in how things work and what makes people tick, and you have to want to speak to people and learn from them and learn what's happening with them. So I really like that part of journalism. Just getting to you can just phone up like an academic expert on something and essentially be like, tell me everything about this topic, and that's like an
It's
amazing
pretty cool,
privilege.
yeah.
You get like a kind of lesson about something that you would never otherwise learn about. So all of that's kind of great. When you put it like that, it's kind of funny to think that that could be a job, but that is what I spend a lot of my time doing. It's just calling people up and chatting to them about things that have happened to them, or calling up experts and asking them to explain stuff to me. So yeah, all of that kind of side of things. And then I like the kind of storytelling of it. I like
Yeah.
putting an article together and thinking about what's going to be the most impactful and how to keep readers engaged and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, a mixture of all those things, I think.
So obviously in your work you cover a few different topics. So what's the most memorable political story that you've covered?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I tend to cover politics with a small p, is often how I
Right.
put it. So it's more about the way that policies might impact people's lives, or the way that they kind of shape society, rather than covering the day-to-day sort of happenings at Westminster, or the Scottish Parliament, because I'm Scottish, so I'm interested in both. But I suppose like one recent example is obviously we had the general election this year. So everyone, kind of when a general election happens, all journalists are kind of trying to find something, find their angle. Even if you're
Yeah.
not a political journalist, you're sort of trying to find how it relates to your beat. And I had been writing a story about abortion and reproductive
Right.
rights, and how what might essentially there had been a big parliamentary debate scheduled that would have kind of vastly improved reproductive rights in the UK. It would have been like quite a big deal, really, if the vote had gone through. But Parliament was dissolved for the election right before that debate was scheduled to happen. So I had been writing a story about how people felt about that, basically. How did campaigners feel that debate wasn't going to happen? Did they think that the changes could still come through in the next Parliament? All of that sort of thing. And as I was writing that, I spoke to some MPs, including Stella Creasy, Walthamstow MP, and she told me that she was actually being opposed in her seat by an anti-choice campaigner, so someone
Oh
whose
wow.
whole platform was around restricting abortion rights.
Yeah.
And off the back of her mentioning that to me, I kind of did a bit of digging and was able to find that it was a campaign across the UK, and there were a number of pro-choice MPs who were being opposed in their constituencies by candidates who were standing on a platform that was wholly about restricting abortion rights and reproductive freedoms. So that turned into a bit of an investigative piece where I kind of tracked how many of them there were and who it was that they were targeting. And so that's kind of memorable political story, because it was so recent. It was around this election, but it's also, I think, a good example of how every journalist can tell political stories, even if
Yeah.
you're not sort of covering like the ins and outs of Westminster through the day. there's still always kind of elements of the stuff that you're interested in that's going to tie into that and those systems. So yeah, that's probably a good recent example.
Listeners, join us for part 2 to hear more about Eve's journey.